How many hours you work today? Work 10, 12? Generally in America, 8 hours is considered a full workday. But why is that? Is that just some natural law? Nope. Sure isn't. 1886. In Chicago, the workday at this time is between 12 and 14 hours long. It's 6 days a week. The demand for an 8-hour working day, having languished unmet for years, just won't go away. Workers in Chicago began organizing again. They were getting ready to observe an 8-hour workday, whatever their bosses thought of it, or their lackeys in the state legislature. And they planned to start observing it on May 1st, 1886. Everyone got on board, more or less. Workers assembled, paraded. They walked from job site to job site, just as they had in 1877, urging the people doing the actual work to join them. Just generally made a ruckus, although a peaceful one, in fine fashion. This went on for days, little or no violence until May the 3rd. On May the 3rd, at the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company, owners had responded to worker unrest with the standard playbook: lockouts, strike breakers, violence, intimidation. Police fired striking workers, killed 2, injured others, inflamed tensions between labor and the police force of Chicago. A few leaflets were printed up after the event calling for revenge in response to the shooting. And these were endlessly referenced in the coming days in the press after what happened. The next day, May the 4th, crowd gathered at DePlain Street in Chicago, the Haymarket Square. The rally was peaceful, lightly attended, basically, mostly. The mayor himself was there. He instructed the head cop to be cool. The speakers were inflammatory, if not inciting. As the rally was starting to dwindle and rain began to threaten itself, one of the speakers urged the crowd to throttle the law, and the head cop was disinclined to consider any metaphorical meaning in this phrase, so he moved in to disperse that crowd. What happened next exactly is unclear, but what we do know is that a bomb was thrown at the police and exploded. It killed 1 officer instantly. 8 in total would die eventually. Panicking police officers drew their guns, began firing wildly, hitting both civilians and each other with gunfire. Some people call this the Haymarket riot, usually implying the workers as the rioters and not the police. Others call it the Haymarket massacre. Others call it the Haymarket affair or incident. 8 people were eventually charged with murder, and something like a trial was held. The trial was a shamefully pathetic attempt at justice. No credible evidence was presented by the state that any of the men had thrown the bomb in question. Testimony of some witnesses tried to imply the defendant's support for this violence. The judge was openly hostile to the defense, extremely sympathetic to the state. Jury selection was a train wreck. In the end, all 12 jurors admitted to being biased against the defendants. The state's evidence consisted of hundreds of witnesses, some rudimentary chemistry, unreliable forensics. Basically, they alleged that one of the defendants built bombs, and it's true, they did have a bomb builder in custody, but not that defendant nor any of the others actually threw the bomb on May the 4th, and it was never conclusively proven that the one bomb maker they had in custody had built the bomb that was used or had anything to do with this specified act of violence. When the evidence was presented, the jury was instructed to return verdicts for the charge of murder under a bizarre and unprecedented legal conspiracy standard, until someone realized they had forgotten to explain what manslaughter is to the jury. The jury was called back in, re-instructed. It didn't matter. Only about 3 hours passed before the jury returned guilty verdicts for all 8 men. 7 of them were condemned to die. 1 was condemned to 15 years in prison. He was never at the Haymarket on May 4th, nor at the meeting on the 3rd. The evidence against him was the most obviously flimsy And it was his case that most clearly puts to lie the idea that the trial was about anything other than being an active labor organizer and political dissident, which is why they were too sheepish to kill him and gave him a sentence of 15 years instead. In his final court address, he specifically ridiculed the police force of Chicago itself as thugs and thieves, and concluded, quote, "There is no evidence to show that I was connected with the bomb throwing or that I was near it or anything of that kind. So I am only sorry, Your Honor. That is, if you could stop it or help it, I will ask you to do it. That is, to hang me, too. For I think it is more honorable to die suddenly than to be killed by inches. I have a family and children, and if they know their father is dead, they will bury him. They can go to the grave and kneel down by the side of it, but they can't go to the penitentiary and see their father, who was convicted for a crime that he hasn't anything to do with. That is all I've got to say. Your Honor, I am sorry I am not to be hung with the rest of the men." His wife died while he was imprisoned, before he too was pardoned on June 26, 1893. The fight for an 8-hour day would continue after this for decades, and in some ways the fight continues today, as longer and longer hours are making a comeback. What we take for granted, what we consider reasonable, normal, it isn't a product of natural laws. It isn't a grant of rights from benevolent and accommodating rulers. And it isn't always through the elections of officials who determine how the collective we are going to do things, though it sometimes is. But other times, it's the result of the literal blood and sacrifice of people who were unwilling to tolerate the exploitation of themselves and their fellow humanity quietly, who could look past some of the things that people take for granted, that they find normal, and grasp towards a new vision. The movement for an 8-hour workday would last at least until the FDR presidency, when it achieved limited victory, when it was finally enshrined in law, not as a gift, but a concession made in a certain sense to the spirits of the 8 men I just told you a little about, and who are worth remembering, I think. I also want to remind you that these laborers organized and got a bill passed in 1867, but electoral politics wasn't enough. Right? 3 years after the trial, 1889, legendary American Federation of Labor President Samuel Gompers wrote to that Congress of the Second International. He let them know that he was planning another strike in 1890 on May the 1st for an 8-hour day. Well, it sounded pretty good to that Congress, and ever since, May 1st has served an opportunity for festival, merrymaking, for memorial, action, for basically anything but going to work as usual and making your damn boss rich. Internationally, from Algeria to Zimbabwe, Oscar Neeb's grandson attended such a celebration in 1939 in Mexico City, a place with little direct connection to his grandfather or his grandfather's comrades, but where the memory of these 8 men was very strong. Because it's one thing to face death, to save a person's life. You can see and hear a person you can touch and embrace, love and even hate sometimes. It's another thing entirely to face death for the love of humanity, of people you'll never meet, who speak foreign languages, eat unfamiliar foods to you, worship different gods, some of whom aren't even born yet. All for imagining a world where it isn't normal to treat workers as disposable.
There has been, in my opinion, a climate at the administrative levels in Washington, D.C. and other state governments to repress the basic idea of the Haymarket, what it stood for, and how it occurred, so as to eliminate it from the historical memory.